Zack is incredible with me and looks at me like a goddess. I love how he sees me. Good thing my husband has such a wonderful friend, because my husband is nothing. He's so clueless, he suspects nothing.
She gushed that Zack treated her like a goddess, obsessed with the worshipful way he looked at her. She relished her husband's ignorance, mocking how his trust in his friend left him completely oblivious. On the morning of April 23, 2024, the Sunset Motel on South Halsted Street became a crime scene after two bodies were discovered with gunshot wounds. The victims were later identified as 29-year-old Tabitha Schmidt and 31-year-old Zack London. What initially looked like a routine crime of passion soon unraveled into a complex tragedy fueled by shattered trust and lethal male ego. Maria Contras began her 7 a.m. shift that Thursday, expecting a quiet morning following the usual Wednesday rush at the Sunset Motel. The 45-year-old employee had served as a maid at the establishment for 8 years, becoming intimately familiar with every corner of the rundown South Halsted property. The motel typically catered to transient truckers, secret lovers, and those searching for cheap, temporary lodging where the management asked few questions. In her later testimony to Detective Rodriguez of the South Chicago precinct, Maria explained that her rounds began at 8:20 a.m., moving systematically from the far end of the first-floor hallway, room 18. The site where the violence unfolded was situated mid-corridor. Records showed it was paid for in cash that morning at an $80 rate. Contras gave the door 3 standard knocks. Following strict protocol, she waited for a response before finally sliding her master key into the lock. The witness recalled that the moment she stepped inside, a heavy, unsettling silence filled the room, accompanied by a stale odor she initially dismissed as poor airflow. When she hit the light switch, she found the small space in total disarray, with chairs knocked over and furniture upended, while personal items were strewn across the carpeted floor. A male corpse lay prone at the bathroom entrance, dressed only in undergarments and an unfastened shirt. Nearby, the female victim was slumped by the bed, partially clothed and bearing a gunshot wound to the chest. According to her statement, the maid immediately retreated without touching a thing, using manager Robert Pence's phone to alert emergency services. Dispatch logs indicate the first patrol unit arrived on the scene at 8:41 a.m. Officers Michael Johnston and Sarah Coulter secured the perimeter, promptly summoning homicide detectives and the forensics unit. A preliminary sweep by the responding officers confirmed that both individuals had died from gunshot injuries. Detective Carlos Rodriguez, the lead homicide investigator for the South District, reached the site at 9:17 a.m. alongside Jennifer Lee's forensic team. Early analysis suggested a 9mm handgun was used at a range of under 2 meters, indicated by the gunpowder stippling around the wounds. The male victim, Zack London, had been killed by a single shot to the heart. Ballistics indicated the bullet's path came from an overhead angle. This suggested the shooter was standing over London while he was either kneeling or hunched over. The total lack of defensive marks or signs of a struggle pointed to a sudden, calculated ambush. Tabitha Schmidt suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to her chest, and a final, fatal round to the head. Forensics expert David Chen arrived at 10:45 a.m., concluding that the initial chest wound was likely not what killed her instantly. The second shot to the head appeared to be an execution, delivered while she was already incapacitated on the floor. Detective Rodriguez noted in his report that the attempt to stage a robbery appeared amateurish and forced. Though the contents of the woman's purse were dumped out, and the man's pockets were emptied, high-value gold jewelry and an expensive watch were left completely undisturbed. Furthermore, finding $230 in cash remaining in the wallet made a drug-fueled robbery in this neighborhood highly improbable. Investigators were struck by a puzzling detail. The door had been secured from the inside with a safety chain. It was a physical impossibility for a killer to engage that latch from the outside while exiting. This implied the perpetrator either vanished through a window, an unlikely feat given the busy parking lot outside, or possessed specialized access to the motel's restricted areas. Manager Robert Pence provided registration logs showing that room 18 had been booked on April 22nd at 4:45 p.m. by a middle-aged man using cash and the generic pseudonym John Smith. Pence recalled a black male with a fit physique standing roughly 6 feet tall. He wore somber attire, though specific features remained shrouded in uncertainty. Security at the lodge relied on 4 exterior lenses patrolling the grounds and a single unit monitoring the foyer. Forensic analyst Michael Torres scrutinized the footage, unearthing critical breakthroughs within the digital frames. On April 22nd at 4:37 p.m., a dark Honda Accord pulled into view. The two figures stepping out were later confirmed as the deceased. The breakthrough surfaced in the tapes from the afternoon the homicide occurred. At 2:12 p.m. on April 23rd, the lot's lens caught a brown UPS vehicle rolling onto the premises. The driver steered the truck toward a secluded patch of pavement. This deviated from protocol. Couriers usually pull up to the main doors for efficiency. For 17 minutes, the van sat motionless before quietly slipping away from the crime scene. Grainy visuals obscured the driver's identity, yet investigators managed to isolate a legible tag from the metal plate. Federal transportation records verified that the vehicle belonged to the corporate fleet. UPS confirmed it was navigating South Chicago that day, operated by a staffer identified as Weiss Schmidt. Lab results from the room yielded several latent prints, primarily matching the biological data of the victim. Yet, a few distinct ridges on the nightstand and bathroom door failed to align with the deceased's records. Technicians uploaded these rogue samples into the national database, hunting for a match among known offenders. With the adjacent units sitting empty, the prospect of finding a direct witness on site vanished instantly. Nevertheless, Detective Rodriguez canvassed the local area. At the neighboring station, Attendant Luis Ramirez shared a chilling detail. Near 2 p.m., he recalled sharp cracks that initially sounded like backfire or holiday pyrotechnics. The relentless hum of Halsted Street traffic led him to dismiss the noise as mundane. Papers recovered from the scene provided the first names for the cooling bodies. ID cards named 29-year-old Tabitha Schmidt and Zack London, 31, residents of Fullerton and Clark Street, respectively. Employment files linked both individuals to Dynamic Systems, a firm located in the city's commercial heart. At 9 a.m. on April 24th, the background check intensified as Rodriguez and his colleague began their hunt. Detective Angela Thompson joined him at the West Monroe Street 30-story skyscraper where the tech company was headquartered. This software enterprise, which developed corporate applications, housed 250 staff across 3 levels of the glass tower. Richard Stanley, the 57-year-old executive at the helm, brought 20 years of industry leadership to the table. He received the detectives within his sprawling 27th-floor corner suite. Stanley praised Tabitha Schmidt's 3-year tenure in HR, describing her as a cornerstone of office professionalism. Her role involved vetting candidates, leading interviews, and managing the integration of new personnel. 6 months prior, Zack London entered the fold as an administrator within the firm's technical infrastructure wing. Stanley viewed him as an elite talent with a resume that spoke volumes. Following stints in Detroit and Milwaukee, he mastered the complex networks, proving his worth almost immediately. Patricia Williams, the 44-year-old HR director and Tabitha's superior, offered a deep dive into the victim's daily routine. Records indicated that Tabitha herself had facilitated London's hiring back in October of 2023. After their first meeting, she championed his recruitment, citing his rare blend of technical prowess and charisma. Williams admitted that something had shifted in her employee's demeanor as the months ticked by. The once diligent Tabitha started slipping, showing signs of a wandering mind and fractured focus. She extended her breaks and began exhibiting a strange preoccupation with the inner workings of IT. She was seen on the 25th floor, the IT hub, repeatedly, and for no apparent objective reason. Her excuse usually involved vague technical glitches regarding the human resources database. HR co-workers verified these claims about the victim's changing habits. Jones, the department secretary, observed a shift in Tabitha. For 2 months, she had been meticulously refining her style with new outfits and a fresh haircut. Midweek, her habits shifted, as she claimed urgent assignments required her presence at the office well past normal hours. This raised flags, as human resources typically saw a significant lull in activity every Wednesday. 1 floor down, Kevin Bout oversaw a 12-person technical squad that kept the wheels of Dynamic Systems turning. Bout, 36, remembered London as a charismatic professional who effortlessly mastered the most grueling technical challenges thrown his way. The subject exhibited an elite command of network administration, driving the push to overhaul the company's aging digital framework. Brandon Walker, the analyst stationed in the adjacent office, offered investigators a candid glimpse into the psyche of his fallen colleague. Walker recalled a social butterfly who bonded with everyone over sports and mechanics, frequently steering conversations toward his twin passions, basketball and cars. Yet, he remained strangely silent regarding his love life or future domestic aspirations. 3 months prior to the incident, Walker detected a subtle fracture in Zack's routine. He began vanishing during lunch and withdrawing from the social fabric of the office, shunning company gatherings. A private shadow seemed to weigh on him. Wednesdays were the most telling. Zack appeared increasingly frayed, often slipping away early, while citing vague bouts of illness. Jamal Harris, a programmer, pointed detectives toward Tabitha's sudden, frequent appearances in the tech wing. She arrived under the guise of troubleshooting human resources software, but her focus never wavered from her interactions with Zack London. Harris witnessed several hushed, protracted exchanges that clearly strayed from corporate protocol into the realm of the deeply personal. Teresa Rogers, who managed the databases, recounted a specific moment from a month before the tragedy. It happened during an office birthday celebration. Tabitha and Zack shared a proximity that suggested intimacy, huddled in the cafeteria, exchanging glances that said more than words. Their behavior didn't go unnoticed. Whispers of a clandestine office romance began to circulate through the various departments. Accountant Michael Foster handed over the victim's punch clock records to the authorities. Tabitha Schmidt typically kept a standard 9 to 6 schedule. Recently, however, her Wednesdays stretched into the night, often keeping her at her desk until 8 or 9 p.m. Mirroring her moves, Zack also began logging late hours on Wednesdays, citing a sudden need for off-hour server maintenance. Thompson's interviews with the female staff peeled back further layers of Tabitha's evolving private world. Colleagues noticed the married woman's sudden, intense preoccupation with high-end fashion trends. Her makeup became more deliberate, and she dropped hints about a desperate need to break the monotony of her existence. She went cold on the topic of her husband and family life, subjects that had once been the cornerstone of her small talk. Digital forensics later unearthed a mountain of electronic correspondence shared between the two colleagues. On the surface, the emails tracked technical glitches within the staffing database, but the sheer volume and tone betrayed a connection that was anything but professional. Between January and March 2024, the traffic between them spiked, far exceeding any legitimate business necessity. The investigation then turned toward the grim task of informing the Schmidt household. On April 24th, at 4:30 p.m., Rodriguez and Thompson pulled up to the two-story residence located on West Fullerton Avenue. It was a modest brick home in a blue-collar pocket of town, well-kept with a functional Ford Focus sitting quietly in the driveway. The door opened to Weiss Schmidt, a fit, 32-year-old man wearing his brown UPS uniform, looking every bit the weary delivery driver. He had just clocked out, the exhaustion of the road still etched across his face. When the detectives flashed their badges and asked to come inside, the man's casual confusion curdled into a visible, cold dread. The confirmation of his wife's death shattered him completely. Weiss slumped onto the sofa in the cramped parlor, burying his face in his palms as a heavy silence took hold. Investigators allowed the man a moment to breathe before initiating a delicate, calculated interrogation. It was the usual protocol for a homicide. The partner remains a primary person of interest until proven otherwise. According to his statement, the last contact occurred over breakfast on the 22nd of April, before his morning shift. Tabitha had cautioned him about a late night, citing the burden of completing quarterly human resources documentation. This news failed to raise alarms. Overtime was a frequent occurrence for her during the end-of-month rush. A 7-year veteran courier, he typically finished his deliveries and reached home by 8 in the evening. On that particular Wednesday, the 22nd, he pulled into his driveway around 7:30 p.m. He cooked a solitary meal and watched television for the remainder of the night. No texts or calls arrived from Tabitha, a pattern consistent with her habit of focusing entirely on work. The realization hit on the morning of the 23rd. His wife had never made it home. Her side of the mattress was perfectly flat, and her pre-selected outfit for the day still hung untouched. Repeated calls to her mobile went to voicemail. Dynamic Systems later confirmed she never arrived for her scheduled shift. His internal alarm intensified as the day passed. Yet, he hesitated to notify authorities, rationalizing that an adult's whereabouts are their own business. While he admitted this was wildly out of character for her, he chose to wait. His plan was to alert the police only if the evening of the 23rd passed without any word. Detective Rodriguez shifted the focus toward the intimate dynamics and potential fractures within their 4-year marriage. He painted a picture of domestic harmony, claiming they were on the cusp of starting a family together. He flatly rejected any notions of domestic strife or a potential separation. However, He conceded that their demanding careers had recently carved a distance between them, limiting shared time. Upon questioning regarding his link to Zack London, the husband balked. He maintained complete ignorance, insisting the name was unfamiliar and certainly not someone from her professional circle. He noted that Tabitha kept her career separate, rarely discussing her office colleagues or bringing work home. Their life revolved around long-standing social ties, while corporate functions were events she invariably attended alone. Thompson, however, sensed a jarring dissonance in the narrative being presented during the interview. The granular detail with which he recounted those 48 hours suggested a script rehearsed for an alibi. To the seasoned investigator, his shock upon learning of the motel scene felt manufactured and overly dramatic. This suspicion was fueled by his apparent lack of effort to locate his wife during her absence. A search of the residence, authorized by the husband, yielded no physical evidence of a fracturing relationship. The master suite was filled with shared artifacts of a life lived in tandem, from clothing to keepsakes. Yet, detectives noted she kept her essentials in a dedicated bag, a subtle hint at a private world. This separation of personal items suggested a tactical need to shield certain secrets from him. Shipping logs corroborated his story. He was indeed navigating the south side of Chicago on the 22nd. Their dispatcher, Robert Clark, then confirmed. He clocked out exactly as scheduled, with no reports of mechanical failures or unexpected delays. While his stops centered on Halsted Street, he never strayed into the neighborhood surrounding the Sunset Motel. The investigation shifted gears, probing the hidden link between the two bodies found in room 12. By the 25th of April, a judge authorized the seizure of mobile devices belonging to the deceased. CPD. Digital forensics expert Daniel Morgan took the lead. The analysis commenced at the high-security facility located on South Halsted Street, deep within the command center. Her device, a 64-gigabyte iPhone 12, became the primary focus for the technical team. It held a massive log of encrypted chats with a contact labeled Z since late 2023. Early correspondence was professional. By mid-December, the tone of their digital exchange had undergone a radical and unmistakable transformation. Digital forensics linked the alias Z to Zack London's handset, cementing the bridge between the two casualties. Deep within the device, Tabitha was listed simply as Tabs, a moniker suggesting a familiarity that went far beyond professional boundaries. Recovered logs began to paint a clandestine timeline of their deepening obsession. Initial exchanges from late November were innocuous, masking their intent behind technical favors and office social functions. By early December, the tone shifted toward flattery and the discovery of mutual passions, eventually leading to arrangements for private encounters. Analyst Morgan pinpointed December 9, 2023, as the turning point, when Tabitha first acknowledged a deeper emotional tether. The sentiment was mirrored by Zack, who spoke of her with an intensity that transcended mere workplace respect. As mid-December approached, their digital footprint turned overtly carnal, detailing covert trysts and the logistical shadows cast by her existing marriage. In January 2024, the dialogue grew desperate as they scouted for a secure refuge. Zack proposed a nondescript motel on the city's fringe, a place where they could vanish away from prying eyes. Tabitha surrendered to the plan, stressing that their survival depended on absolute secrecy from her husband. Pinged location data placed both handsets at the Sunset Motel every Wednesday afternoon starting that January. GPS records tracked them there for hours, typically between 4 and 7 in the evening. The archives also laid bare the psychological toll of their entanglement. Tabitha was frequently haunted by the betrayal of her vows, yet she clung to the euphoria Zack provided, venting about a hollow domestic life and a husband she no longer knew. She felt her very identity was being suffocated by the mundane expectations of marriage. For Zack's part, the fixation grew into a demand for her to abandon her life for him, promising to wait for the finality of a divorce. Scattered throughout the data were blueprints for a clean break, a new life in a distant city, stripped of their current ghosts. Financial investigator Sarah Connors traced a paper trail of Zack London's spending back to the same motel. Every Wednesday, bank ledgers recorded a cash withdrawal of $100, a sum covering the room rate and the incidental costs of their secret hours. Credit logs further tracked him to convenience stores and fast food outlets just steps from their hideout. A specific purchase on Halsted Street, intimate essentials and contraceptives, left little room for ambiguity. The evidence confirmed that their connection was as physical as it was forbidden. Detective Thompson returned to Dynamic Systems to probe the staff for cracks in the couple's facade. He was looking for the moments where the mask slipped. Lissa Henderson, the executive secretary, recalled a jarring afternoon in March when she stumbled upon them in a dark boardroom. They were standing in an intimate proximity that shattered the illusion of a working relationship. In February 2024, Carl Davis, the system administrator, flagged several anomalies within the company network. Digital logs showed Zack Lundum had been snooping through internal files, specifically hunting for data on Tabitha Schmidt, a search entirely outside his clearance. Marketing lead Cheryl Brown also sensed a shift in Tabitha's professional focus. The HR specialist had developed a sudden, sharp interest in the IT department's technical briefings. Her inquiries were strangely sophisticated, revealing a grasp of the systems that her job didn't require. Michael Foster, from accounting, handed over records of several peculiar queries from Tabitha. She had been asking about the mechanics of taking extended, unpaid leave and the possibility of relocating to remote company outposts, along with the specifics of resignation, a strange trail for an HR veteran to leave behind. Maintenance worker Gloria Martinez alerted investigators to several peculiar items she retrieved from the office wastebins. Detectives recovered handwritten notes from a female source in Zack's workspace, detailing intimate correspondence and scheduled rendezvous. Though she initially dismissed them, Martinez recalled the discovery due to their jarringly personal nature within a corporate setting. Security officer Tommy Roberts, stationed at Dynamic Systems, documented multiple security breaches and unauthorized entries within his official logs. Tabitha Schmidt frequently remained on site long after hours, justifying her late-night presence as a necessity for pressing assignments. Yet, video logs contradicted her story, placing her inside the information technology wing alongside Zack Lundum instead. A forensic audit of the company's internal communication lines, performed by specialists, uncovered a surge of private calls between the two offices throughout early 2024. The sheer volume of these exchanges far surpassed any standard metric for professional interdepartmental cooperation. Furthermore, the length of their dialogue spanned well beyond what any routine business matter would reasonably require. Detective Rodriguez subpoenaed 3 months of surveillance records from the retail complex adjacent to the Sunset Motel. Scrutiny of those recordings established that Lundum's personal vehicle, a charcoal Honda Accord, was a fixture in that parking lot every Wednesday afternoon. It typically sat idle for 2 to 3 hours before the driver resurfaced and headed toward the downtown district. Cross-referencing the video timestamps against cellular tower triangulation data, verified that the pair reached the vicinity simultaneously despite taking divergent paths and utilizing separate stalls. This calculated behavior suggested a deep-seated fear of exposure and a deliberate attempt to evade any wandering eyes. Sunset Motel proprietor Abdul Rashid handed over 4 months of guest registries to the investigating team. Logs revealed Room 18 was a weekly Wednesday staple, reserved under aliases but settled in cash by a solitary individual. Physical profiles provided by multiple front desk clerks aligned perfectly with the description of Zack Lundum. Housekeeper Maria Contrarus, the first to witness the crime scene, later recounted certain oddities she observed while servicing Room 18. She noted the space was clearly occupied by a duo, citing mixed gender belongings, dual meal remains, and unmistakable signs of an intimate, shared presence within the unit. Local business owners in the immediate area contributed further crucial intelligence to the task force. Mechanic Luis Gomez reported seeing the same black couple arriving at the motel every Wednesday for several months. He characterized the pair as mature, sophisticated, and visibly guarded, seemingly desperate to blend into the background. Across the street, gas station attendant Joseph Clark surrendered security tapes that had tracked the victim's movements for weeks. The visuals confirmed a rigid Wednesday routine, proving the two consistently utilized that specific car for their clandestine trysts. An in-depth behavioral assessment, crafted by Dr. Elizabeth Parker, framed their dynamic as a textbook illicit romance fueled by intense emotional reliance. Their private messages painted Tabitha's involvement with Zack as a desperate flight from the monotony of her domestic reality. Conversely, Lundum viewed the affair as a genuine foundation for a permanent future with his idealized partner. Dr. Parker zeroed in on communications from the final weeks, where Zack demanded a definitive resolution regarding their secret lives. He voiced growing resentment over their ambiguity, pushing to finally bring their hidden connection into the light of day. Tabitha, however, remained paralyzed by the prospect of dismantling her world and the consequences that would follow. Financial statements from the Schmidt household, reviewed with the husband's permission, showed no irregularities or suspicious withdrawals that would suggest he suspected his wife's double life. Their fiscal history appeared perfectly routine, lacking any sudden fluctuations or unexplained costs that might raise a red flag. Nevertheless, Detective Thompson found it chilling that the husband never asked a single question regarding the grim state of the crime scene. This profound apathy suggested either a state of total catatonic shock or, perhaps, that he already knew the answers. A review of delivery manifests confirmed that the husband's route frequently brought him directly into the South Halsted Street neighborhood. Logistical logs proved the driver frequented the Sunset Motel's perimeter twice monthly for half a year. Come April 26th, Detective Rodriguez's team meticulously mapped the timeline for April 23, 2024, the Sunset Motel double homicide. A cold, systematic review of timelines and eyewitness accounts, along with digital forensic breadcrumbs, aimed to unravel the tragedy and unmask the killer. Tabitha Schmidt's final workday began with deceptive normalcy. Surveillance at Dynamic Systems captured her 8:47 a.m. arrival, mirroring her standard professional routine. She wore navy business attire and carried a purse later found containing her ID and phone. Colleagues observed nothing out of the ordinary in Tabitha's demeanor that Tuesday morning. Secretary Rachel Jones recalled the victim processing hire paperwork throughout the early hours, attending a strategy session, then grabbing a bite in the company lunchroom with coworkers. Zack London also checked in per his usual schedule, arriving at 9:15 a.m. The IT specialist spent the morning patching servers and troubleshooting technical glitches for the staff. Analyst Brandon Walker noticed Zack seemed preoccupied, constantly glancing at his mobile device, untypical for the focused tech. Internal logs show the final communication between Tabitha and Zack occurred at 1:22 p.m. That 4-minute and 17-second call significantly exceeded their typical brief professional exchanges. The conversation's nature remains a mystery. The firm's PBX system didn't archive internal voice traffic. By 2:15 p.m., Tabitha exited the building, telling her supervisor, Patricia Williams, she was interviewing a prospective hire off-site. She omitted the specific location, vaguely mentioning a neutral setting, a common tactic for headhunters meeting talent currently employed elsewhere. It was a standard discretion move for interviews conducted during business hours. Zack London walked out at 2:28 p.m., citing an urgent hardware call at a client's office. He never logged the destination address, an anomaly that puzzled his manager, as such field visits required prior scheduling and documentation. Perimeter cameras caught both leaving the garage 6 minutes apart via separate subterranean exits. The woman climbed into her white Toyota, South Halsted bound, while the man's dark Honda threaded through the city's heart. Simultaneously, investigators scrutinized Weiss Schmidt's itinerary. UPS dispatchers supplied the exact delivery coordinates assigned to the courier that Tuesday. The manifest listed 32 drop-offs scattered across Chicago's industrial South Side, targeting primarily commercial warehouses and manufacturing zones. Supervisor Melvin Jackson verified Weiss started his engine at 8:15 a.m. sharp. He drove a brown package car, the same plates later spotted near the Sunset Motel crime scene. Digital signatures and scan data initially placed Weiss on a perfectly routine, efficient schedule. By 1 p.m., 21 deliveries were completed with professional precision and no delays. Records showed 0 deviations from his planned route during the first 5 hours. The timeline fractures after 1:30 p.m., showing a suspicious 40-minute void in activity. His next scan occurred at 2:12 p.m. on West 35th, blocks from the motel. Mechanic Robert Hill told police he spotted a UPS van idling at the motel at roughly 2:20 p.m. that day, noting its presence felt wrong for that quiet residential strip. In his statement, the vehicle lingered 20 minutes before vanishing. By April 27th, however, Hill's story began to crumble. The witness confessed that on the murder date, a heavy liquid lunch clouded his memory. Detectives soon discovered Hill's checkered criminal past. A history of minor larceny undermined his credibility on the stand. Darrell Watson, a local bus driver, offered a far more convincing account. His route took him down Halsted Street, where he spotted a delivery van at the Sunset Motel around 2:15 p.m. on April 23rd. The delivery truck's presence in that area felt highly suspicious. Watson described the vehicle sitting in the motel's most secluded corner. It was a sharp departure from typical courier behavior. Usually, They parked near the door for speed, but this driver was nowhere to be seen, raising immediate red flags. Across the street, gas station attendant Joseph Clark held another clue. He provided tapes from April 23rd, placing the truck on site from 2:12 until 2:29 in the afternoon. High-resolution frames captured the plate and a shadowy figure behind the wheel. A detailed tape analysis by imaging expert Marcus Rodriguez brought vital clues to light. The footage revealed a black male in standard brown attire stepping out of the cab. He moved toward the building, clutching an unidentified item, possibly a weapon or a heavy instrument. Some statements, however, began to crumble under forensic scrutiny. James Miller claimed he saw a Caucasian male in athletic gear fleeing the scene at 2:30 p.m. Investigators quickly dismantled his story. Miller was clocked in 20 kilometers away. His memory had simply failed him. The account provided by neighbor Dorothy Brown proved equally problematic. The neighbor insisted she heard screams at 3 o'clock, but the facts didn't align. Medical records showed severe hearing impairment, making it impossible for her to hear anything from that distance. Furthermore, the timeline she proposed clashed with the established crime window. The case turned on footage from the Sunset Motel's own lobby. Despite the grain, experts tracked the uniformed man entering at precisely 2:17 p.m. on April 23rd. He held a key for room 18 and climbed the stairs with chilling purpose. That card had been issued the day before to a guest using the alias John Smith. Yet, the plastic surface yielded foreign prints, prompting an urgent search through the National Criminal Database. Crime scene tech Jennifer Lee found more proof of an intruder's presence. Latent prints on the bathroom door belonged to neither Tabitha Schmidt nor Zack. The positioning suggested the door had been pulled open from within the room. A bedside table also bore palm prints that were foreign to the victim's records. Ridge analysis suggested the prints belonged to a man with heavily calloused hands. This was a hallmark of manual labor. This finding narrowed the field of potential suspects significantly. On April 28th, detectives served a warrant at the Schmidt home while Weiss watched. He did not obstruct the search and willingly provided his fingerprints for comparison. The house on West Fullerton Avenue was scoured with surgical precision. Forensic teams examined every room. They hunted for a murder weapon or any link to the motel tragedy. Investigators focused on the basement and bedroom, where they discovered several items of interest. 9mm rounds were tucked away in Weiss's dresser, though the handgun was missing. He claimed he once considered buying a firearm for protection, but never did. A parking slip from April 22nd raised even more questions. The document was timed at 5:08 p.m., a window when Weiss was working. He disavowed any memory of visiting the district, claiming the date on the receipt was a clerical error. Inside the garage, investigators noted unmistakable traces of a thorough, recent cleaning. Harsh industrial solvents had been used to scour the porous concrete floor. Tucked in a corner, forensics recovered cloths saturated with what appeared to be technical lubricants. Laboratory testing later identified microscopic deposits of gunpowder residue embedded within the fabric. The basement held the most damning find: a 9mm Glock 17 hidden behind a water heater. The firearm's serial numbers were obliterated, marking it as a black market weapon. Ballistics experts later confirmed this handgun fired the rounds recovered from the crime scene. Weiss maintained a cold denial, insisting he had never laid eyes on the weapon before. He suggested a frame-up, alleging an intruder must have used a duplicate key during his absence. However, every entry point remained secure, showing no evidence of a forced breach. Clear biological impressions were lifted from the pistol's grip and the surface of the trigger. The ridge patterns matched the digital samples taken from Weiss with absolute precision. Robert Chen's analysis concluded there was a 99.8% certainty of a match. Neighbors of the Schmidt residence soon began detailing the suspect's erratic behavior before his capture. Gladys Williams, who lived next door, recalled a chilling scene late on April 25th. She observed Weiss frantically excavating a hole in his garden by the dim light of a lantern. At the time, she dismissed it as eccentric late-night landscaping and didn't intervene. A search of the property confirmed her account, revealing a shallow pit filled with loose soil. Beneath the surface, detectives unearthed the charred remains of clothing and personal effects. Among the ash were fabric scraps containing type A blood, matching the victim Tabitha Schmidt's profile. Microscopic traces of firearm discharge were also detected on the singed remains of the apparel. This suggested the wearer was in the immediate proximity of a weapon being fired. The evidence coalesced into a damning timeline of Schmidt's role in the double homicide. His biological signatures were found exactly where the victims drew their final breaths. The lethal instrument was eventually recovered from the bowels of his own home. These clumsy attempts to incinerate the evidence provided the foundation for a first-degree murder charge. On April 30th, Rodriguez and Thompson secured a warrant to seize Weiss for the killings. The arrest was predicated on a comprehensive web of forensic and circumstantial proof. This included the ballistic link to the weapon and the DNA recovered at the scene. Witness accounts further placed the suspect at the motel precisely when the tragedy unfolded. The apprehension was choreographed to ensure public safety and the preservation of any remaining evidence. Police moved to intercept Weiss at his workplace on South Wabash during his 7:30 a.m. shift. Supervisor Melvin Jackson was quietly notified of the impending police action at the facility. He ensured the officers had unrestricted, discreet access to the distribution hub's interior. The company cooperated fully, providing detailed logs of the suspect's movements and schedule. At 8:07 a.m. on April 30th, the handcuffs were finally applied. At the moment of the takedown, Weiss was performing his routine duties, processing parcels for his designated delivery route. Bystanders noted he offered no resistance, accepting his fate with an unsettling, blank stare. Detective Rodriguez recited the Miranda warning, officially stripping the suspect of his ignorance. He listened without emotion, signing the waiver to confirm he understood his constitutional protections. He declined an immediate attorney, stating he preferred to speak with the detectives first. The drive to the central precinct was marked by an oppressive, heavy silence. Inside the transport vehicle, wrapped in a heavy silence, Weiss betrayed his composure with restless hands and a gaze that refused to meet those of the detectives. Thompson watched closely, recognizing the classic unraveling of an amateur criminal staring down his first major indictment. At 10:45 in the morning, the official questioning commenced within the sterile confines of a high-tech interrogation suite. Every syllable and subtle shift in movement was captured by a hidden lens, ensuring an unbroken record of the suspect's testimony. Investigators Rodriguez and Thompson took their positions while Maria Sanchez sat ready to document every word for the official record. Early on, Weiss was adamant, flatly rejecting any claim that he had a hand in the double homicide of his spouse and her associate. He stuck to a rigid narrative. On April 23rd, he was simply working his route and never set foot near the Sunset Motel. The accused appeared, visibly shaken by the discovery of the firearm in his residence, insisting he had never laid eyes on the murder weapon before. Rodriguez began laying out the state's case with clinical precision, pivoting from minor details to damning proof, beginning with security video placing a brown delivery van at the scene of the crime. Weiss brushed off the footage, suggesting the camera had misidentified his truck or that the timestamps were somehow compromised. However, the shift toward forensic evidence, specifically fingerprints, triggered a visible crack in his stoic facade. He fixated on the images of the latent prints from the room, comparing them to his own with a look of growing dread. Desperate, Weiss tried to allege a frame-up or lab mistakes, but his protests grew hollow as the physical proof piled high against him. This critical turning point arrived with the unveiling of the ballistics report on the pistol recovered from his own property. Forensic specialist Robert Chen confirmed the grim reality. The slugs pulled from the victims were a perfect match for that specific gun. With a margin of error under 0.1%, the link between the suspect's firearm and the deaths was undeniable. The unrelenting mental strain of the interview room slowly began to erode what was left of Weiss's resolve. Thompson watched the physical manifestation of guilt take hold, manifesting as heavy perspiration, shaky limbs, and a desperate struggle to find a comfortable position under the hot lights. A visible war raged within him, a final battle between his instinct to lie and the realization that his secret was out. The final blow fell when investigators revealed they knew the truth about the secret romance between Tabitha and Zack. A trail of text messages and eyewitness accounts from co-workers, paired with bank statements, exposed a calculated affair that had been flourishing in the shadows for months. The revelation shattered him. Weiss buried his face in his palms, sinking into a heavy, suffocating silence that lasted for ages. At that precise second, the carefully constructed walls around his psyche finally came crashing down. Understanding that the law had mapped out every detail of his betrayal stripped away his last hope of maintaining his charade. He started obsessing over the timeline of the betrayal, demanding to know how often they met and how deep the love went, his voice dripping with the raw agony of the jilted. Rodriguez sensed the vulnerability and gently prodded, inviting the broken man to finally unburden himself and tell his version of events. Playing on empathy, the detective whispered that he understood the rage of a betrayed man and wanted to hear how things had spiraled so far. The psychological gambit hit its mark. Weiss finally broke, agreeing to recount the horrors of April 23rd, providing a confession that would be etched into the official logs. He claimed he stumbled upon the infidelity by sheer, cruel chance while out making his rounds. His scheduled deliveries that afternoon took him down South 37th Street, a mere stone's throw from the motel where his world would end. Once his last drop-off was done, he pulled over for a quick meal. As he cruised past the motor lodge, he spotted his wife's vehicle sitting in the lot, a sight that immediately felt out of place. Initially, he tried to convince himself she was just meeting a client or a coworker, common enough for her job, but the seediness of the establishment gnawed at him, turning his confusion into a cold, hard knot of dread. Driven by a dark curiosity, he parked his work van and walked toward the office to confront the truth. He identified himself as her husband to the manager, Robert Pence, demanding to know where his wife was staying. Pence balked at first, hiding behind a wall of corporate privacy and motel policy, but under the weight of Weiss's relentless pressure and valid ID, he finally pointed the way to room 18. Stepping into the motel, Weiss heard unmistakable sounds of intimacy drifting from behind the door. He confessed that the shock of betrayal ignited a rage that buried his reason. Confronting the pair in their room became his sole, desperate mission. Weiss later recounted retrieving a handgun from his delivery car's glove box, a weapon kept for work safety. He admitted the gun was an illegal purchase from an acquaintance months earlier. The shooter couldn't identify the seller, claiming the deal was a random, drunken transaction. Arming himself turned a domestic crisis into a cold, criminal act. He used a spare key obtained from management under false pretenses. Entering the room, he caught the pair in bed, confirming his darkest suspicions. His testimony painted a grim picture of a man driven by pure emotional shock. Weiss described a total breakdown where humiliation and fury eclipsed all logic. He insisted the killings were impulsive acts rather than a planned execution. Records show the first shot targeted Zack as he tried to flee the bed. The round hit his chest, and he collapsed near the bathroom door. Tabitha screamed, reaching for her phone to call for emergency help. The next shots were fired at his wife as she hid behind the mattress. Weiss admitted to shooting Tabitha twice, first in the chest, then the head, claiming he wanted to end her pain. Detectives viewed the final shot as a cold move to eliminate the witness. Afterward, Weiss staged a robbery, scattering belongings to mislead the police. Fearing security cameras, he tried to make the scene look like a random heist, but his panic and inexperience left a trail of obvious forensic errors. Abandoning the crime scene, he resumed his route, acting normally to avoid arousing any suspicion. Weiss finished his shift and went home to process the night's carnage. It wasn't until the next morning that he realized a full police investigation was inevitable. Weiss attempted to hide the evidence by stashing the gun in his basement and burning his blood-stained clothes. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation to assess his sanity during the murders. The evaluation was led by Dr. Gerald Stone, a veteran forensic psychiatrist with 20 years of experience. He specialized in analyzing violent crimes triggered by extreme emotional distress. Stone conducted 8 hours of clinical interviews and standard diagnostic tests. The study examined the suspect's personality, his emotional health before the crime, and his lack of impulse control. Findings showed Weiss had no mental defects that excused his actions. Though showing signs of acute stress from the infidelity, he remained fully aware of the consequences of pulling the trigger. Stone concluded the murders were a visceral reaction to the sudden betrayal. He noted the behavior mirrored typical patterns of male domestic violence, yet emphasized that rage is never a legal excuse for murder. New clinical evaluations surfaced, detailing his predisposition for volatile outbursts under pressure and a profound lack of emotional regulation. Raised without a blueprint for peaceful conflict resolution, his childhood in a broken home likely fueled his lethal reaction to the betrayal. The assigned caseworker, Linda Harris, delved into his inner circle, seeking to map the killer's psyche and social landscape. Peers saw him as a steady, diligent worker, someone with no history of violence or brushes with authority. Dolores Schmidt, the man's mother, detailed the fractured bond between her son and his father, an alcoholic prone to sudden rages. She theorized that early trauma crippled his ability to navigate adult heartache, yet maintained he was inherently a man who shunned confrontation and sought quiet solutions. At United Parcel Service, Coworkers recalled a model employee, dependable, sharp, and held in high regard by the team. Manager Melvin Jackson pointed out that throughout 7 years on the route, he maintained a spotless record, consistently exceeding every performance metric. On August 12, 2024, Judge Harold Washington opened the state's case against Weiss Schmidt in the Cook County Circuit Court. Leading the state's charge was Marcus Johnson, an assistant district attorney, with a career built on prosecuting killers, while Patrick O'Connor, a public defender with 12 years in the trenches, took up the defense. 3 days of screening produced a jury of 12, a cross-section of the city's varied demographics. Presiding over them was Robert Davis, a retired educator with 30 years in the classroom, who emphasized the group's collective weight of duty and their commitment to an impartial weighing of facts. Opening for the state, Johnson painted a grim picture of a calculated execution born from envy and spite. He drove home the point of cold-blooded intent, noting the killer arrived armed and ready, making a deliberate choice to end 2 lives. The prosecution vowed to deliver ironclad proof of first-degree murder against Weiss Schmidt. Defense counsel O'Connor admitted to the jury that his client's hands were stained with blood, but argued the charges should be mitigated to second-degree murder, citing a total psychic collapse. He contended that Weiss hadn't plotted a massacre, but was broken by the shock of his wife's betrayal, losing his grip on reality in that terminal moment. The state began its case by calling the lead investigators who had combed through the wreckage of the scene. Detective Carlos Rodriguez walked the court through a minute-by-minute timeline, from the initial discovery to the handcuffs. With clinical precision, he laid out the mounting evidence, weaving together ballistics data and forensic prints. Alongside grainy surveillance tapes, Sunset Motel maid Maria Contreras then took the stand, recounting the gruesome discovery in room 18 as the first responders reached the scene. She spoke of a scene made to look like a botched heist, an amateurish ruse that failed to fool her since the victim's jewelry remained in plain sight. She noted that for months, the pair had been Wednesday regulars at the motel. Forensic specialist Jennifer Lee broke down her findings from the site, dissecting blood spatter patterns and latent prints left in the chaos. She guided the jury through the science of identification, showing how the prints in the room were a perfect match for the man in the dock. She further revealed that residue found on the defendant's laundry matched the discharge of a firearm. Ballistician Robert Chen confirmed that the rounds recovered from the morgue were fired by the Glock 17 hidden in Schmidt's basement. He lectured the court on the unique rifling marks left on spent casings, stressing that the margin for error was less than 1/1000%. He testified that the shots were fired from within 2 meters, a range that screamed execution, not accident. Co-workers from Dynamic Systems eventually broke the silence on the illicit romance between Tabitha Schmidt and Zack. HR lead Patricia Williams noted a disturbing shift in her subordinates' conduct over those final months. Information technology head Kevin Bout recalled Tabitha's sudden fixation on tech issues and her wandering toward Zack's station. Admin Brandon Walker provided insight into his late colleague's private world and the romantic distraction that changed him. The witness portrayed Zack as a driven professional who became increasingly distant, drifting away from his duties into a private, distracted state. Sunset Motel owner Abdul Rashid confirmed a couple matching the victim's descriptions frequented room 18. He detailed the cash payments and their avoidance of identification, a standard practice for such discreet rendezvous. The proprietor identified the defendant as the man who claimed to be the victim's husband on that fatal day. Driver Daryl Watson testified he spotted a brown delivery truck idling in the motel lot on April 23rd. Watson noted the vehicle's odd placement, tucked away in the furthest, most shadowed corner of the property. He grew suspicious when he saw no delivery activity, just a truck waiting in total silence. Supervisor Melvin Jackson submitted the digital logs documenting the defendant's exact movements during the murders. Jackson explained the precision of courier tracking, highlighting a suspicious gap in the defendant's schedule that perfectly aligned with the killings. Forensics expert Daniel Morgan unspooled the digital breadcrumbs, from intimate text threads to damning GPS data. The specialist demonstrated the slow transformation of a workspace partnership into a secret, physical obsession between Tabitha and Zack. Digital records placed the victim's phone at the motel with chilling regularity every Wednesday afternoon. Dr. Gerald Stone offered a psychological profile of the man sitting at the defense table. Stone testified that while under strain, the defendant remained fully aware of his actions' legal gravity. He characterized the defendant's mental state as a volatile explosion triggered by the shock of betrayal. Dolores London, the victim's mother, shared a heartbreaking portrait of a son whose bright future was abruptly and violently extinguished. She struggled to comprehend how a simple affair could spiral into such senseless, irreversible tragedy. Tabitha's sister, Monica Henderson, shed light on the fractured marriage and the quiet distance growing between the couple. Monica admitted her sister had become a ghost in her own life. Though she never suspected infidelity, she maintained there were no warning signs, no history of violence, or expressed fear within the home. Character witnesses described the accused as a peaceful man, far from a cold-blooded killer. Longtime co-worker James Carter stood by his friend, calling him a reliable, steady presence for 7 years. Carter expressed utter disbelief, claiming he had never seen a flicker of rage in the man. Neighbor Gladys Williams recounted 4 years of observing the couple from across the street, describing them as the picture of domestic quietude, polite, private, and seemingly content in their suburban life. Not once did she hear a raised voice or the sound of a brewing storm from their home. In his final plea, Attorney O'Connor leaned into the narrative of a man pushed too far. He painted a vivid picture of the psychological trauma caused by the sudden discovery of a spouse's betrayal, framing the violence as an impulsive act of pure, unbridled passion. O'Connor urged the jury to see this as a crime of the moment, seeking a second-degree conviction. Prosecutor Johnson countered with the sheer savagery of the act, demanding a reckoning for the lives taken. He argued that a broken heart is no license to execute 2 defenseless people in cold blood. The state demanded the jury find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder and deliver the maximum sentence. For 2 days, 12 strangers weighed the fate of a man against the evidence of his rage. The foreman later revealed that the debate centered on whether this was a moment of madness or a plan. The jury reached a consensus. Weiss was responsible for taking 2 lives. A fractured deliberation ended on August 18th, yielding 2 counts of murder in the second degree. While jurors recognized his emotional unraveling as a mitigating factor, they ultimately decided his actions were far from a lapse in self-control. Weiss stood for the verdict, his outward calm masking the internal chaos. Sentencing was scheduled for August 25th, allowing both legal teams to prepare their final impact statements. Prosecutors demanded the maximum penalty, citing the profound wreckage left in the killer's wake. The defense countered with his history of good character and lack of prior offenses. In a stifling courtroom packed with grieving families, the judge finally spoke the sentence. Judge Washington ordered 25 years for each count, with both sentences running at the same time. The sentence totals 25 years, with parole possible after 18 years for good behavior. Dolores, London's grieving mother, wept with relief, telling the press that justice had finally been served. No penalty could bring back her son, but she hoped the sentence proved that no one should resolve familial disputes through violence. The tragic downfall of the Schmidt and London families serves as a haunting reminder that in the digital age, there are no secrets, only delayed consequences. What began as a clandestine escape from the monotony of marriage ended in a cold motel room, proving that betrayal doesn't just break hearts, it shatters lives with the force of a thunderclap. This story is a sobering mirror for us all. It teaches us that momentary passion is never worth the price of a permanent ending. When communication fails, or when a home feels cold, the answer is never found in the shadows of deception. True courage isn't found in a secret rendezvous. It's found in the difficult, honest conversations that happen in the light. Furthermore, we must recognize that unbridled rage is a prison of its own making. Weiss Schmidt destroyed his world to settle a score, but the only thing left on the ledger was a lifetime of regret and the hollow silence of a prison cell. The lesson: honor your commitments, or have the integrity to walk away cleanly. Respect the humanity of others, even in your pain, because once the trigger of a choice is pulled, whether it's a lie or a weapon, you can never, ever call it back.